Hi, I'm Pastor Emily from Lutheran Campus Ministry in Madison, and I'm back today to talk about another contemplative practice with you. We are now in the Christian season of Lent, which spans 40 days between Ash Wednesday and Easter Sunday. The season of Lent is traditionally a penitential season and one in which Christians devote themselves again to spiritual practices that draw them closer to God and to one another. And there are three disciplines that are traditionally associated with Lent. The first is prayer, the second is almsgiving, and the third is fasting. Prayer is something that I think that we understand pretty well, and almsgiving is simply the giving of resources to those who are more in need than we are. Fasting is abstaining from something as a way to grow closer to God, or to grow in faith. Usually we see the practice of fasting in Lent when somebody tells us that they've given up sweets, for example, or given up meat for Lent. In Wisconsin, we are aware of the Catholic practice of fasting on Fridays from meat because we see a lot more Wisconsin fish fries on Fridays during Lent. I have not always really liked the idea of fasting. It has often felt like it's sort of a overly pious or showy kind of practice. When you tell somebody, oh no, I can't have any sweets because I'm fasting right now, it kind of feels like you're showing that you're more devout or more faithful than somebody else. But I think that when we think about how fasting can move from being something that's about us to being something that's about our relationship with God, it can really help us to have a different perspective on fasting and see it in a more positive light for our faith. So I thought I'd just share a few thoughts about different ways to understand fasting and invite you into thinking about how you might try this practice in your own life. So as I talk about fasting, I want to frame it as having three different purposes. So different types of fasts are meaningful to us because they have different purposes. So the first kind of fast I wanted to talk about is a fast for mindfulness. The desired outcome of a fast for mindfulness is to become more aware of God's provision and move away from taking God's blessings for granted. I want to start by saying that the good things in life, sugar, good food, alcohol, sex, material goods, none of those things is inherently evil. We don't fast from any of those things because they're bad. We fast because it gives us a different perspective on something when we take a break from it for a little while. Dallas Willard, a writer about Christian spirituality, once pointed out that, quote, "We dishonor God as much by fearing and avoiding pleasure as we do by dependence upon it or living for it." So the purpose of fasting is to enjoy God's gifts to us rightly and come to truly experience enjoyment from the abundance of what God has given to us. Lauren Winner is a Christian writer, and in her memoir, Girl Meets God, she talks about a Lenten fast that she did one year where she gave up books. She gave up reading for information, and she also gave up reading for pleasure. Now, Lauren is a self-professed learner. She loves to learn, and she also loved to read. And so this was a difficult task for her to give up books. But through her practice, Lauren Winner talks about how she came to new insight about how she understood herself and her relationship to books. She had a different perspective on how she saw her intellectual pursuits, her desire to always be gaining more knowledge. And she also had a new perspective on the ways that she used reading, especially reading fiction, as a way to escape from what was going on in her daily life. Through her fast, Lauren Winner became more aware of the gift of reading, and she was able to have a new perspective about how God blesses us through this gift. I think that the idea of reading is something that's really helpful to think about, because reading is something that is inherently good. We don't think that it's something that we should abstain from normally. But Lauren Winner's practice reminds us that we live in a society that is chock full of abundance. There is so much available to us. Everything from food to information, to things to buy, to opportunities of how we're going to spend our time. And we can sometimes stop noticing how abundant things are in our world. And so, if you're interested in noticing God's provision more and also finding more joy in the abundance of the world that God has made, a fast for mindfulness might be the kind of fasting that you would want to try. The second kind of fasting that I wanted to talk about is a fast for solidarity. In the Bible, in Isaiah 58, the prophet writes, "Is this not the fast that I choose? To loosen the bonds of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break free from every yoke?" Since before the time of Christ, fasting has been a practice often associated with solidarity for the poor and the oppressed. This kind of fasting isn't an empty ritual, but one that draws attention toward the ways in which our world doesn't reflect what God would like for our world to look like, and ways in which we can help God's reign to come to earth, that we can make God's love and mercy manifest in our world. You might remember that way back before COVID-19 started, in certain circles, there was a really common practice of abstaining from using plastic straws. Not using plastic straws or other forms of single-use disposable plastic became something that people did because they wanted to draw attention to the ways that plastic was harming our oceans and also the wildlife that live in our oceans. I remember the first time I became aware of this movement away from straws. I was in a restaurant with my husband, Paul, and with another couple. And when we sat down to order, when the server came to ask about our drinks, one of the members of the other couple said, "I'll have whatever, but I don't need a straw. Please don't bring me one." And I was curious about why the person had said that and made a point to say that. And so I asked, and my friend explained to me very kindly how much she had learned about the effect of straws and other disposable plastics on the oceans. And she talked a little bit about how their family was trying to stop using single-use plastics altogether. One of the dangers of fasting out of solidarity is that it can be kind of preachy or judgmental when you talk about it. But I think that when you think about abstaining from something and fasting from something as an opportunity to provide a witness to something, that can be a really powerful thing. When my friend told me about what she was doing, she did it in a way that was very kind and humble, and I felt invited to join a similar practice of using fewer single-use plastic items. And actually, I chose that as my fast for 2020 for Lent, which was ironic because then COVID-19 started and we started eating takeout all the time, nonstop. Fasting and solidarity can also be a chance for us to get a glimpse of what it's like to have less privilege than we do. It's a chance to give up something that most people in the world probably don't have or take for granted. A few years ago during Lent, I decided that I would give up my car. Actually, I didn't give up my car. I gave up using my car. Our car still just sat in the garage with nobody driving it. And so instead of driving to work each day, I would take the bus, or as the weather got better, I would ride my bike to the office. And I would try to do my errands in our neighborhood. So by buying groceries or other items at the places that are within walking distance of our house. And it was a really hard practice. A lot of things were very, very challenging about it. Riding the bus was unpleasant and really inconvenient. If you missed a bus in the evening, you had to wait like a long time before another bus came. And I particularly didn't like buying things that were large or heavy and then having to haul them home. I remember getting really upset about having to find a way to get a big, huge bag of dog food back to my house in the middle of Lent that year. But throughout Lent, I tried to remember the burdens of millions of people in our country and across the globe who don't have access to reliable transportation or personal transportation at all. And that made my practice of solidarity feel more real and more meaningful. And the other thing is that I really tried to focus on the environmental impact of not driving my car, and think about how I might continue to lower my carbon footprint even after Lent was over. Giving up the car was probably my hardest Lenten practice, but it did inspire me to really reduce the number of trips I make, even in the long run. And I especially found that I really enjoyed riding my bike. And so I now ride my bike a lot more than I did before that Lent. A fast of solidarity can help you to feel closer to people who are in need. And it can also give you opportunities to bring attention to issues of injustice in our world that you're passionate about. Both of these things can be ways that we're more aware of God's presence in the world and that we can participate in God's reign becoming manifest. So the last kind of fast that I wanted to talk about is a fast for making space. Removing one thing by its nature opens up space that we can put something else. And a kind of fasting that can be deeply meaningful is fasting from something that takes up too much room in your life, something that's crowding out things that are more important. Maybe it's something that's getting in the way of your relationship with other people, or something that is getting in the way of your spiritual practice. A few years ago, one of our students at LCM gave up wearing her earbuds for Lent. When she walked around campus or was studying at the student center, instead of listening to music or podcasts, she would just be more aware of the world around her because she didn't have her headphones in. And when I talked to her about this practice, one thing she said was that she had noticed when she was walking around on campus that when she wasn't wearing her earbuds, she was making eye contact with people a lot more. And she was even smiling or saying hello to people that she didn't know. And she felt like that openness to being more aware of the world around her, like by making space for seeing people, that she was actually called by God to be more of an agent of kindness or friendliness on campus. And I noticed the importance of this kind of fast the most when it comes to my phone. And I'm sure you notice the way your phone gets in the way of other things also. In the evenings after work, I often will sit in this room that I'm in now, which is the living room of my house. And my 3-year-old daughter, Eleanor, will be playing with toys around me. And I'll get out my phone and I'll start mindlessly scrolling and reading things. And before I know it, my daughter, Eleanor, has obviously asked me a question or told me something, and I have not paid attention to it at all. And Eleanor is frustrated, which makes complete sense. And I feel guilty about that. And so maybe if I give up my phone, I am able to make more space for Eleanor or for my husband or for whoever, to give my attention to a person or a task that really deserves that attention. And one thing that I've really noticed about using my phone or taking breaks from using my phone is that when I'm hanging out with my kids, I have a much better time. Like I enjoy it a lot more if I'm actually paying attention to them. And so by making space, I can really not only be a better mom, but I can also be more open to seeing the wonder of how they're growing and what they know, wonder that helps me feel closer to God by making space for that in my life. So if you're feeling like you need more space to really be close to God or close to other people, then a fast where you give up something, a fast for making space might be the kind of practice for you. Okay, well, those are the three kinds of fasting that I wanted to talk about. And to finish up, I just wanted to share a few ideas about how you might think about and carry out doing a fast in your own life. So, first, I would say that you should prepare for whatever fast you're going to do by thinking about what you're going to fast from and why you're going to fast from it. So, what's the purpose of the fast that you're choosing? Make sure that you know what your intentions are, and that will really help you have the understanding that you can gain something from it, and also will help you have the perseverance of actually doing it. And I would say that when fasting, it can also be really helpful to put limits on how much you're going to fast instead of saying you're not going to do something at all. So, like, instead of completely giving up your phone, like saying for an hour in the evening or 2 hours in the evening, I'm going to put my phone in another room and I'm not going to use it. You're a lot more likely to do that than to like not use Instagram through like an entire Lent, which would be really hard, I think. Second, as you go about your fast, I think it's really important to notice what's happening to you. So how are you feeling? Are you irritated or bored, or do you feel deprived? Or maybe you feel more grounded, more open, more grateful. Notice what old patterns from your life are more apparent to you because of changing something. And also notice what new patterns are emerging because of your fast. And finally, as you're fasting, and especially toward the end of whatever period of fasting you choose, think about your practice and about what you would like to take away from it afterward. What have you learned? It's not just a race to the finish line so that we can eat sweets again. It's about a discipline of learning something about ourselves, about God, about the thing that we're fasting from. And so hopefully at the end, you'll have a good sense of what you've learned and how you've changed because of this practice. So that's about it about fasting. I hope that you will give this practice a try and that maybe it will seem more meaningful to you and less superficial than it did at other times. And I hope that if you do try it, that it's deeply meaningful for you. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.